Gaurav Gandhi, Vice President, Prime Video. Nanjira Sambuli, Fellow, Technology and International Affairs Program, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Amritpal Singh Bindra, Founder, Still and Still Media Collective. Rangita Pratish Nandi, Creative Director, Pratish Nandi Communications. The panel will be moderated by Vikram Chandra, Founder, Editor, G Technologies.
Hey everyone, it's a great pleasure to be here at the Global Tech Summit. Look, in many ways, content has always been a key part of India's soft power globally. It's nothing entirely new from the days of Avara, from the days of Raj Kapoor in the Soviet Union, to more recently Jimmy Jimmy in China right now as a metaphor for what is actually happening out there with COVID protests. India's soft power has always been there, but now with new technologies coming, with streaming coming, with a far more globalized world, with different forms of segmentation, with the ability to take that content to a range of people who may not have had easy access to it in cinemas. Are matters going to change further? And is this technology going to aid and assist the further expansion of India's soft power and use content as a major leverage, allow you to leverage that content as an instrument of soft power? That essentially is the basic subject that we are here to discuss. Before we dive into the many other themes that we have, Gaurav, you want to just take a first crack at it? Technology, the changes that are happening, the OTT revolution. Is it an inflection point?
I think, hi everyone, glad to be here. Vikram, I think the fact that the OTT revolution has been on for about, as we call it, for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's been growing steadily, so to say, from an adoption point of view. But the big jump that we all saw was at the point of the pandemic. And at that point, the adoption went up quite meteorically. There are many factors to the revolution being there, and in India particularly. The fact is, we have a young demographic more attuned to actually watching content on demand. We have the mobile phones are ubiquitous. Everyone has it. Smartphones, cheapest data in the world, and absolutely amazing content, across the board with a flourishing content industry across languages. So while all that was there, I think the pandemic really sort of gave it a big push in terms of increased adoption, and resulted into many changes thereafter. Some permanent, some temporary. We can talk about them as we go along. And I think the 3 or 4 big things that we talk about today as we look at India's soft power is, we have this at least 9 or 10 languages. We have flourishing content industries. In most countries, you'll have probably 1 or 2. And the fact is the amount of content that plays out from there is one part. The second is there is a huge domestic market. And the domestic market has changed very dramatically on tastes, over the last few years, tasting content from India and around the world. And now we are seeing Indian content map up to global standards. And then, of course, there's also the point about the fact that we, in the past, never actually had high-quality cinematic value content in the TV era because of the economics. But with the streaming, the economics change, and what you call a target addressable market for content has changed. You can actually put money behind it. You can put actually great quality behind it and do that. So that's the second part. And third part, to me, is the creative ecosystem here has learned in the last 5 years how to make world-class stories, which as quickly and compete with the creators from around the world, and we have two of them here who can talk more about it. So I think with the addressable market, with a rich, robust creative ecosystem overall learning quickly, and all the tailwinds, I think we are in a good place right now as an industry, and we are only getting started.
Right. I think that sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about. Nanjira, the point I was making about, to some extent, it's always happened. Soft power. When you look at India's influence globally and on the diplomatic stage, is that soft power an important part of it? Yoga, food, local content, great movies, great music.
Absolutely. And I think it's even more about what could be in this era where, as Gaurav was talking about, younger people with more access to this kinds of content, creating these new bonds that should be represented on the diplomatic stage. I think there's a great opportunity for India to also set an alternative way for how other industries in other markets, Nollywood, for example, in Nigeria, fusion even of especially South-South, beyond just the Western lens, that would be really interesting for this diversity that India already as a market represents, but can be showcasing how soft power also can be about representation and that cooperation that we hear about in a very technical speak, but it's everything from fusions. We're seeing young South Africans taking Bollywood dance songs and added to the beats of Amapiano in South Africa, or a young Maasai man, I've seen this in it's real time happening, who sings these pop hits, probably doesn't understand a single word, right? But he hears it and he enchants that back. It's actually really cool. And that shows that there's that South-South element there that could really be something that propels soft power to a new plane, and here's a great opportunity to do that. And technology is at the core of that because of discovery, forms of content, and actually even bypassing typical copyright issues. This video cannot be found in your location. Our markets understand creative ways to get content to each other. So that does represent something different for India's diplomatic circuit to think about.
Yeah, that influence is actually quite extensive. I think one of my favorite Amitabh Bachchan stories is a real story that a lady doing the sort of a safari, desert safari, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, car breaks down, thinks she's going to die, finds a Bedouin camp, walks inside there and says, now I'm going to either be murdered or something horrible is going to happen to me. And she walks inside and she says, I'm from India. And those people look at her and saying, India? Amitabh Bachchan? Yep. Amitabh Bachchan? They made her sit down, they gave her food, they kept her there for the night, took her the next day, got her car repaired and sent her home. So yes, it happens. When you're making Bandish Bandits or any other content, increasingly, is the global stage important, or are you still pretty much saying this is local content, let's go after the local market first? Has that changed?
Hello, everyone. So, Vikram, specifically about Bandish Bandits, I think, it's a bit of both. While one of the big changes that, as Gaurav mentioned, has happened over the last 5-6 years is I don't think Bandish Bandits could have been made if the OTT revolution hadn't come in. As a cinema experience, or at least been made at the scale and in the way that we were able to tell a story on classical Indian music, because of the economics, because of the kind of demographics that watch typical cinema movies, I don't think we would have had the chance to make it. So I think the first big thing for us in terms of Bandish Bandits was the ability to make the show itself was a privilege that only came thanks to the OTT revolution. But having said that, I think truth be told, while we were making it, we were obviously, catering it to, sheepishly even to the local Indian markets, not knowing whether people will respond to it. Because, we used to get commentaries before Amazon took on the show saying, we like this idea, but why don't you make it Bollywood music? Or, why don't you make it pop music? Like classical music, no one is really now interested in listening to or wanting to hear. So we were like, but then there's no show. I mean, the show is about classical music. So I think when we were making the show, we were very conscious and careful, saying that, if we can hit home with local audiences, we'll be more than thrilled. But I think then what happened after, and especially the fact that it was, it was platformed over 190 countries. And, Amazon did such a great job of marketing it in a way that made it appealing and commercial to people all across demographics, all across various countries. The amount of love that we got for the show from non-NRI Western audiences was something that we had no idea, or we didn't even think was a possibility while making the show. So, when we're talking about soft power, when we're talking about people, like I have white friends who went to film school who now work out to songs from Bandish Bandit, which is also disturbing at some level. But that's the kind
Actually,
of.
I was just
I've
about
had
to
people
ask
who
you that
said-
question. How do you work out to a song from Bandish Bandit?
And they do. And in fact, they work out to a song called Vira, which is the song of longing, which is of an old romantic couple. So I have no idea how this is translated, but there is definitely some connect. And I'll tell you one more thing. We were more confident of the pop music, because there's also pop music in the show. And I cannot tell you that there has been such a clear winning of the classical music and the tunes across the board within local Indian audiences and definitely globally, that came to us as a very pleasant surprise.
Okay. So the fact that Indian content can translate around the world has been clearly proved by that. If somebody had told me you could actually work out to Indian classical music, I wouldn't have believed you. I probably still don't believe you, but still, we will park that just for the moment. Now, I'll tell you where the technology part. He said something very important. Platformed in 190 countries. Now that's where technology plays a slight difference, because till 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you were saying, I want to take this globally, which means I have to take it to cinema theaters. You've got to approach it from a certain manner. And all right, Amir Khan movies could translate in China and people would watch them, or something else would happen. But your ability to use platforms like Amazon Prime and others, that changes the way you're visualizing content, presumably, because you're not having to launch it into cinema theaters everywhere.
Absolutely. I think for the very first time, we're actually conversing with the world. And until now, listen, for us as creators, we'll create content any day. But for the longest time, we were creating content only for like a homegrown audience per se. And like you said, an NRI audience, right? A spillover NRI audience. But for the first time, I think we're actually talking to the world. That's actually the finest part about having people like Amazon here. They facilitate that for us. They set us up for that. When you're talking to the rest of the world and not just to a homegrown Indian audience, you have to be able to make content that's going to be interesting for them. You can't just say that, I make this for India. Of course, it has to do really well in India as well, because that's your primary audience. That's the audience that you're reaching out to first. But the rest of the world is a fabulous ocean that you now have direct access to. So if as a creator, you're not using that, it's kind of like a wasted opportunity. So absolutely, we're all talking to the globe in that sense.
Gaurav, when you're looking at this from the point of view of, okay, we are trying to translate India as a place where you were importing a lot of content historically. You're wanting to now export it also. All of these changes and the technological changes, how does it affect things like segmentation, for example? Because till now, segmentation had to be done, okay, I'm going to do this for North India or South India or that. Now, are you looking at content and saying, okay, this can be segmented to this particular demographic in India, but it will also translate into this demographic in Africa and maybe a sub-demographic in Latin America, and this content could... So it's a different sort of a way of approaching segmentation altogether.
Yeah, I think, great question. I think I divide that into three different kinds of segmentation points. First, ability to tell stories that we just could not tell in the past, given the economics of that business. So I'll give you an example. If you go back to the 90s and you had only single screen theaters, why would all the movies be typically the masala movies with actually comedy, action, drama, song, dance, everything built into it? Because you had to fill 1,000 seats in the theater. So you had to cater to a taste segmentation, which was a little more broader, center of plate all across the board. The moment multiplexes came, you could actually program for 100 screens, 100 people in a screen. And you actually could have the Dil Chahta Hai and Gully Boy and all of that. So I think streaming is allowing you to do, first of all, that, to create content for segments. Now the question is, how large is the segment? And that question comes in from point of what you can do in the domestic market and the international market. One of the permanent changes of what happened with the pandemic and over the years of programming across 10 languages here is we're seeing the linguistic palette of the Indian audience itself become much broader. So today people are watching content in more than one language. So 50% of our audience actually watches content in more than 4 languages. So which basically means my addressable market for anything, even the segment has gotten broader. It's now 4x because they're actually watching content across languages. A Malayalam movie is being watched across the country, right? So the third part of that piece comes in of the international and the diaspora and non-diaspora. which then automatically allows, so as an example, 20% of our audience for any of our originals is outside India, that we locally make here. 240 countries is where we actually are, on territories are where we are available in, and most of our movies and shows are watched between 160 to 200 countries in the weeks of launch. And now what happens is, I have a core addressable audience which I have a segmentation on, and then I have an audience by virtue of technology who may have liked this, and their personalization then throws more like that. And they start getting used to it. And the moment you start getting used to the idea of the film music you talked about, or a particular content from a particular country, we talk about Korean shows, we talk about shows from Latin America. Same thing happening with India. You say, hey, great quality content coming here is part of my recommendation each time. So I get more and more. So the audience pool itself keeps expanding. And then, of course, you serve more of that. So first of all, like to summarize, we couldn't make segmented stories earlier. We are able to make it now. Second is like the domestic market pool itself has expanded so much, allowing a larger target market. And then, of course, the international plays on in this play of expanding it for the entire market. And I would say one more thing here. It's really not just about a story that Prime Video would put out, or Netflix or Hotstar. The reality is, one great Indian show from any of us works for everyone, right? So I think it's similarly local market, because it's too early in the days and there's so much more the headroom for growth. So actually it's more the market making and category creation time for Indian content, that every great film, every great show from anywhere expands the pool for Indian content. So yeah.
That's an interesting point. And he's right that if you ask people about their viewership patterns here in India, multiple Indian languages. Look at the sort of success that movies from the South are getting now, radically more so than earlier. The fact that, as he said, Korean shows, Israeli shows from multiple different places in different languages, you're watching them and not even thinking twice about the fact that it's in a different language. Is this, to your mind, something which is happening across the globe, or is it more in some markets where you're open to international content?
Absolutely, and I think what it brings to mind is it makes our languages okay, right? There's means to translate. Maybe the algorithm on the subtitles may not get it right, but it does open up for, say, Nollywood in Nigeria to figure out how to use all the diversity of languages there, or Kenya or South Africa or elsewhere. What that does, even for the diplomatic, maybe down the line, diplomatic engagements, we don't always have to use English and French, right? It could get there because you read, that you translate, you start to pick up some words, you bring it into your local dialect, and so on and so forth. So there's something about Indian content, even before the digital era, because I remember VHS tapes making the circuit back home, that shows that there's a possibility, it stands for something about these languages that need to be brought in as viable as any other Western language that we've been told is a way of doing business, but now we're being shown through entertainment that it's a way of life, and it's okay for us to also express ourselves that way. So in that regard, I think there's a great potential to, make it okay for everybody to express themselves, articulate themselves with what works for them, and then we'll learn from one another that way.
Have you stopped thinking too much about sharp segments in your own mind? Have you stopped thinking about things like this will work in this culture or these areas? Have you stopped thinking about language and this could be a language barrier? Is that gone out of your head or not yet?
I think by and large it has. I think, there is the ability, as Gaurav very rightly said, that now one can segment, one can think of telling more true-grown stories. But, I think more than even just if you look at the Indian audience, which is something that, we often miss, even before the step of kind of, exporting our content internationally, we're a very weird country where we have such diversity that trying to cater to pan-India, which is the new famous term, itself is quite a confusing and challenging term, at least for content creators, I think, in today's time, because you talk a lot about the South, the uprise of the South, but we mustn't forget that their core audience is still very homogeneous and is one state, Whereas the Hindi film industry is catering to Haryana, Delhi, Bombay, Pune, West Bengal, Bihar, CPCI, Madhya Pradesh, which in itself is very, very diverse. So in fact, the segmentation, in fact, is very diverse even between those audiences. The kind of films that do much better in North India are not the ones that do well in Maharashtra. Like for example, I'll give you an example of one of the biggest movie makers like Rohit Shetty. His average business of every film is 60 to 70% from one state, Maharashtra. But he hits the ball so out of the park in this one state that those numbers are massive. So, but when you really start talking about segmentation, there is a huge segmentation even within the country before we start thinking about taking it out. What I think has gone away is the thought process that, oh, this film cannot be made because it will not get a theatrical release. I think that thought has gone away. I think the freedom and liberty that content creators today have to tell great stories or stories that might be very niche, which actually might be very segmented, is all possible now thanks to the OTT revolution. So I would actually say that it is a very, very liberating time. And in fact, the pressure is really now on us as content creators to create absolutely world-class content, because here the opportunity is there, the technology is there, the money backing us to do what we want if we have a great story and ideas there. So really, there is absolutely no reason other than the failure of content creators for us not to be a global export over the next 5 years and not be creating world-class series out of India on a regular basis, not as a one-off, but on a very, very regular basis.
Okay, I'm going to pick on one line that you said, the money is there, Rangita, as I throw that to you, right? Because while a lot of this has been said in the past, has been there as a concept in the past also, for years I've been hearing in panels like this, but how do you monetize? How do you make the revenue? Who pays the bills? Now, it's good to have someone like Gaurav out here who says, don't worry, I'm going to be paying the bills, but is there enough money now to be able to do a lot of this, the revenue models?
Well, there's more and plenty. Absolutely. I don't think money is what's holding us back right now. I think we as creators need to step up with just great ideas now. We're so conditioned to live within an Indian film industry that many of us are unable to think beyond that well, and we're just opening our minds up. We're also extremely lazy in that sense, there's money and we're running to pick it up, but we're not respectful of that money and understanding of how it can really change the content industry as we see it and as we've known it. So money's there. Mr. Gandhi here is an extremely generous boss, and there are many of him around. But we really, really, really need to step up and make world-class content that's not just ticking boxes, content that's not just making stuff for little pockets of audiences, but content that can really get out there. There's the Squid Game, there's everything happening around the world. I want to show run the next Squid Game.
Gaurav, without giving away our age, I remember having conversations with you, 14 years ago about revenue models and how money can be made. Is it easier with the new technology and with streaming and everything else that's happening? Is it easier to monetize now, setting creation aside?
I think because the audience, first of all, streaming gives so much option to the customer at the end of content. It is even harder for the creators to make sure that they tell stories which are compelling and will keep audiences on. So a lot of pressure on the creators to create the stories. But what streaming is enabling you to do is a multitude of models, Vikram. I think what was earlier was that we were fixated on, in the TV world of ours, which we both came from, it was largely ads, some subscriptions. In the film world, we'll pay for a ticket, we'll have this whole piece, and Amrit clearly called out about the intricacies of how the film market works as well. The interestingly streaming world, we're just 5-7 years of the industry. You have a pure SWOT model. You have an ads plus subscription model. You have a transactional model emerging. We're actually already doing rental of movies. You have a model where you can actually do a B2B subscription piece. So there's so many models emerging already. So you can actually choose, hey, I actually want to give a story to our customers absolutely without a fee and have a large number of customers on. You can be on a free service, you can be on YouTube, you can be elsewhere. You have your own channel on YouTube, for that matter. Or you can be on Mini TV, or you can be on MX Player or whatever. You have a subscription service which can go global. You can actually say, I want to be on Prime Video or others. I think that's there. You can also now, to the point of release of movies, in the pandemic, when we first got a set of movies to release on theater, there was a lot of question about the fact that will it ever work? And I remember the first few movies we got on, the creators were uncomfortable, they were not sure. But once they saw the reach of that, the fact that 200 countries you could release a film on, people could watch it, which would earlier be in 12 countries. And in India, you talked about the one state viewing, Amrit. The reality is today most of our movies from the southern languages are watched, 50% of the audience is outside the home state. So the money is not just in the models, the money is actually also in the fact that there is an audience size expansion. So I think the technology is enabling both the models to emerge and the audience size to grow. And of course, it's not that it's an easy business to do. It's, content is expensive. But I think the fact is that content lives with you for a long time. People come back on, anybody new comes on to streaming service, they'll watch also the older season, they'll also watch. So ability to monetize that also has changed quite dramatically.
Let me go in reverse direction this time. Right? The other debate, in addition to monetization, the best ways to do it, which has been around for a while, is the technological form factors itself. And I think that's something which many of us have been really interested in trying to get the answers to. Short form, long form. Are you programming for the big screen? Are you programming for the television screen? Are you programming for the mobile screen? It's not necessarily the same content. It's not necessarily the same experience. Should it be vertical? Should it be horizontal? All of these are questions that have been around for a while. Are we any closer to getting the definitive answers to them?
I think the only thing that's definitive today is long form, short form. Nobody really cares. The content that you're making has to really reach. That has to transcend. That has to speak to a vast variety of people out there and not just, decide to live in a little bit of a cubby hole. So long form, short form, really, today when we're doing scripts, we don't even look at what is the length of the script that we're looking at. We get to that when we're budgeting. But when we're writing, there's no conversation about making it for the big screen or the small screen, because you know that there's an audience out there that will engage with you and appreciate the content you're making if you just make a great show. So I think today more than ever, the idea is standing out, not the star that's standing at the front of it, not the filmmaker that's sitting behind it, but just, in fact, today, writers have more, place of pride than anybody else, I feel, in the business.
But just to take that follow-up question to that, but surely if you're making something which is short form, or 1 minute or 2 minute, it's designed more for a mobile phone. If you're making something which is a 2-hour-long movie, it is designed for a larger screen because it's tougher to do it. Or is that not the case anymore?
I think I'll jump in there. From an actual viewership point of view, the reality is this country has 95 or 96% have single TV homes. Right, one TV in the house. So, and mobile phones are with almost everyone, like 600 million people have smartphones. So the reality is today, when you are creating content, you're actually being completely screen agnostic. First of all, for many, this is the only screen, right? So, and they love the content. And that's the liberating point about this, that the screen actually is not, it's my personal screen that's important. I could be watching it. If I have access to a large screen, I will pause and start playback there. If I don't, I'm perfectly happy with this. There are challenges of distraction which are very different. For example, the same screen has your message coming in, your call coming in, and if I drop off, do I go back? That's the engagement point, the two of them talked about here. In TVs, you more lean back and all of that. But I don't think at all we distinguish or segment customers when we're creating great stories basis, hey, X customer has a mobile and Y customer has a living room device or Z has a computer. That is not relevant at all. What's relevant is our content engaging, and whatever your choice of device is for you, you choose and watch and enjoy it.
Nanjira, is that a pattern everywhere? Or is it, see, in India, we are very used to the the power and the dominance of mobile phones, A, because they're ubiquitous, and B, because data is so cheap that it almost doesn't matter the amount you're streaming. By mistake, if you ever wander into Canada and say, I'm going to stream on my mobile, on my mobile phone on a mobile plan, you'll be bankrupt in like 2 days, right? So you have to think about it.
No kidding, yeah. No, it is the case, and I think he's right. Gaurav is right. It's about the engagement of a story, and it got me thinking, even as Indian content creators start to tell stories of the world, the distinguishing factor to that soft power component will be that representation aspect. Let me use an example as an analogy. Typically the joke is when you watch a Hollywood movie, be it a long or short form, when they have a Mexico filter, it's like the shades on kind of thing. When it's an African story, there's an accent, and it's like there's only one Hollywood accent, African accent trainer or something. The engagement on the story, long form, short form, whatever will come after the mobile phone, is what will really, keep people hooked. A story that, people see themselves in or challenges them. And actually, most importantly, right now, beyond the West, for people in Africa, elsewhere, a story that tells any part about them that is as true and authentic to that experience over and above a curated imagination that we White Lions or something like that, is what will keep people hooked. And that's what will keep creating the markets and actually even having the cascading effects where if money here is not the problem, you guys can come and invest, right? And work with folks on the other side. Yeah.
Okay, so as I try and get final thoughts from everyone before throwing it up to the audience, Amrit, Indian content, let's just look a little bit ahead in the future, next 4 years, 5 years. To what extent do you see Indian content increasingly becoming a major factor globally, right? Going to more and more countries, becoming a major instrument of Indian soft power? And the quality of it, is it going to be as good as the best in the world?
Yeah, so I think, Vikram, I'm very, very confident and very optimistic, and I think the future is very bright. I think there's going to be a lot of that happening, and as you said, I think, and I mean it at the highest level and at the highest quality, and I mean it across the board. I just don't mean it in terms of service. I think, we need to start getting more Oscar nomination movies. We need to do it across the board. We need to get more Grammys. We need to get more Emmys. I mean, it's all part of that larger extending pool. And I think we're at that place today where, we have the talent. And I mean, I don't mean this in a bad way, but we also have the viewing numbers. We're just such a large country and so many of us outside that we also have a huge population, which will always help also in exporting this, even within the diaspora. But I think today we're really at that point where we have amazing talent. We have technicians to tell and execute those stories in a manner which can be world class. And I think, the South has really shown that. I mean, if you kind of see the videos that are on YouTube, on the kind of responses that an absolutely white audience is having to a film like RRR in local boutique theaters in LA, which are not your standard AMC and your standard kind of global chain theaters, but in local theaters, you will be astounded that we're there. We're already there. We've started that march. So now really the onus is very much on us. I think it's not on doing it once, it's doing it consistently, and it's doing it even better as we go along. And, I think some of the filmmakers said this 10 years ago and it hasn't happened. But I'm going to take another punt at it and say in the next 10 years, I will not be surprised if the next Spider-Man or the next Batman is an Indian actor. So, let's clock it from now to 10 years. But I think that's a real possibility now.
Angita, your overall take on that?
Honestly, I think we've been excellent storytellers right from the top. Like he said, from Satyajit Ray to Rajamouli, we've kind of told stories really phenomenally. So I don't think that's really new where we're concerned. What I think is really new is streaming. That's the new kid on the block, right? And that takes us and sticks us smack in the middle of every content conversation today in the world. Are we making content as good as our peers in the West? Absolutely. I think there's a lot of content being made, and plenty of it is on the same stage as our Western counterparts. It's a matter of time, really, and the world's recognizing it. The world's talking to us. Everybody's talking to us. LA's dialing Mumbai every day. It's a very, very fertile time. And absolutely, I think the content that we're making right now, it's going places. It's doing really good things.
Nanjira, part of the reason why the United States has played such a dominant role in the 21st century was not just military power, but was soft power. American culture was the defining culture in many ways of the previous century. Is there a chance that countries like India could start doing that in the next 20, 30 years?
I don't know that India or other countries should be trying to replace what has been. It's just to be as authentic in a representation that then others see themselves in. The difference with Hollywood is, for many of us outside, that was the only content you could pretty much access.
Yeah.
You know, that said, so there's a whole context to it. But I think rather than replicate it, is just tell stories and open that up for people to be seen and feel seen. And that's how you create markets, and that's actually how you sustain the audiences back, whether it's a long form or short form. So I think it would be it's not even about meeting the Western standard, it's just setting the standard of what is there to be told. And it may be even flip this question, and eventually Hollywood is looking at the standard that has been created because you're following the true path here, which is there are so many new stories to be told over and above the template Hollywood had set.
Right. Gaurav, last word from you. So the reason why Hollywood could do that is, as she said, Hollywood was the only content most people could access. They were the only people who had the ability to get their films into cinema theaters everywhere. Streaming changes that. Streaming has obviously seen a massive jump during the pandemic. I guess the final question is, how much of this is temporary and how much of this is permanent, the changes?
I think the temporary part, the only temporary part was the fact people had more time that time. So you could do more hours in a day of streaming. But the permanent part is that the habits that you formed are permanent. If you moved from non-streaming to streaming, or you changed you started watching more genres of content, you started consuming some things only online versus what you're doing elsewhere, or happy to watch movies at home, and new movies at home, and still go to theaters for some. All of that is a habit-changing piece. The second habit-changing piece is what I talked about, is linguistic. The fact is, you're no longer saying that what's going to be my list is only my language, because now all of this is my language. So I think that's permanent. The very big implication for that, for us, in our soft power view, is that we now, while we had 10 content industries, for the first time we are one unified Indian content industry, which has so much more to offer to customers India and abroad, and even more strengthening our view to how India can export its soft power.
All right, I think we have enough time for a couple of questions. If I can see a show of hands, yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Wasim, a GTS Young Ambassador from Kautilya School of Public Policy. In the past, we have seen there have been some calls for boycott and harsh reactions against some web series and movies, because they seemingly hurt the sentiments of public in India. So if there's a brilliant script which can cater to the global audience but might seem risky in India, how do you navigate this space? How do you give the best creative output to the global audience without compromising or self-censorship on the script? Thank you.
You always have to be sensitive to the people around you. It's as simple as that. You come from a particular city, a particular country. You can't diss that to be able to get to a global audience. So I think as content makers and creators, just like there are 5 of us on this stage today, and we're respectful of each other and allowing each other to finish saying what we want to, because before we step up, I think you just need to be respectful of sentiments around you, and take each day as it comes in that sense.
All right, the gentleman there.
Hello, am I audible? Yeah, okay. My name is Rijul Sarstev. I'm a GTS Young Ambassador from IIIT Bangalore. So this is a question to the panel in general. I was just wondering, typically nowadays, if you walk into a bookshop, you're not likely to see too many Indian authors unless it's a Chetan Bhagat or an Amish Tripathi or something like that. Now, it's also true that the average Indian reads a lot less than his Western counterpart. Now, with that, and keeping that concept in mind, now KDP has revolutionized publishing, it's true, but there are also a lot of self-publishing houses that have come up. So do you feel, as content creators and as OTT people, do you feel that there's a need to embrace novelists, writers, poets out there and get their feed as well as the traditional scriptwriters, or not?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think a lot of that is happening. I think there's a lot of books that are being transformed into shows, into movies, and I think that it's happening more than ever before. So I think
But
there is.
do you think it's happening as much as it is in the West?
And I think it might be more nascent in comparison to the West, because the West probably started doing a lot more of it much earlier. But I think actually there is a huge demand. In fact, I would say that what we're lacking right now is original storytelling. I feel actually, if you really think of it, a lot of our storytelling is either some form of taking away from either a book or another movie, or an international movie or a South remake, and I think a lot of that is happening. So in fact, I think there is enough of literature, if I may say so, that is being brought into the system. But again, actually, I think one of the big challenges, as you said, what I have noticed, at least amongst most of my colleagues and friends, is I think content creators of today have started reading less. And I think that's a huge problem. I think a lot of us have started watching a lot more, which is great for business. But for original storytelling, I think the big problem is that we're not reading enough. And actually, if you go back, leave alone books and kind of movies, we go back to our basic literature. Even if you just go back to Ramayana and Mahabharata, I'm telling you, there is a treasure trove of stories that we have not even scratched the surface of before we start trying to copy the Chronicles of Narnia or the Avatars of the world. There's an entire pool out there that is, underserviced to today's very, very exposed audience.
All right, I suspect we are flat out of time, so thank you all so much for having been with us. Thank you so much.